Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you to GMAT Club for hosting. Before I begin, wanted to mention that if you want to see more sessions like these, hit subscribe to the GMAT Club YouTube channel, and you'll be notified of them. Also, wanted to mention that as part of today's session, you can receive a 7-day subscription to the GMAT Club tests. Activation is instant. Just look for a link in the comments. Great to get that out of the way. Also, if you're enjoying today's session, please hit like or dislike, either way, whichever is applicable, but I hope you enjoy it. So I am here today to talk about a very important topic, and that is leadership. Leadership is perhaps the most important quality that admissions committees look for in their applicants. But exactly what that means is a little bit confusing. So I'm hoping to demystify it a bit for you, and then also talk about how you can really showcase your leadership in your application. So I have some slides to go through, which I'll get to in a minute, and I hope you will find helpful. And then I will open it up to some Q&A at the end. All right, going to flip over to my presentation, just to give me a sec. All right, believe you should be seeing that now. All right, so what are we going to go through today? As I mentioned, it's about leadership and how to showcase leadership in your MBA applications. First, we'll go through a quick introduction about me and Vantage Point, the firm that I work for. Then we'll talk about what is leadership exactly, and then how do I showcase leadership in my application. So starting off, for an introduction here, my name is Katie McQuarrie. I attended Kellogg for my MBA. I also, over the years, have served as an alumni interviewer for Kellogg, which I enjoy a ton. And also, I've made my career here for the time, like last, I guess, almost 5 years here in admissions consulting. I'm a senior consultant for Vantage Point. Vantage Point is a wonderful firm. We're the advisors, mentors, and coaches throughout the entire MBA application process. We really pride ourselves on being high touch, personalized consultants for you as you go through the stressful process of trying to decide where you're going to attend business school and getting accepted, most importantly. Another key asset of the Vantage Point team is that we really leverage one another. Our consultants went to top MBA programs or served as admissions officers for those programs. And, we're a really collaborative group. We're constantly sharing learnings and experiences and, answering each other's questions. So, while your individual consultant is sort of the quarterback of the process for you, we have this whole team behind us, and, we really, come together to achieve superior results. In fact, our clients get into the top MBA programs at a rate that's 3 times the average. So, the proof is there. And it's a really, a job I really enjoy, really love working with people throughout this process. So that's a little bit about me. Let's jump to what is leadership. So I have a couple of thought starters here. So leadership, a lot of times people think of it as managing a team, which is great. But, a lot of people applying to business school are concerned that they, don't manage a team yet. So, think about, you could think about leadership as managing a team, perhaps. Sometimes people think about leadership as, having a fancy title. So, in college, I was editor-in-chief of my college paper. Also great. Is that leadership? We'll get to that in a minute. Third, someone, might be showcasing their, extraordinary achievements. So I built a complex model that impressed the CEO. Again, it's fantastic, but is it leadership? Let's talk a little bit more about that. Then lastly, I'm a tutor at an underserved school. Fantastic. Giving back to the community is certainly something that admissions committees value, but is it leadership? That's the question. So, here are my thoughts. Managing a team, that's great. And it certainly, can be leadership, but really the critical element there is, how did you manage that team? Did you, cause the team members and the people that reported you to really grow as individuals, to achieve more than they would have if you were not their leader? Were you inspiring to them? Did you, help the team achieve more together than any of the, individual people would have on their own? So really, it's not just that you have that management title on your resume, but, what did you do with it? So, it probably is leadership, but, you really need to describe more about that experience than just having the title on your resume to be effective. Second, having a leadership title like editor-in-chief of my college paper, or, some other strong title is fantastic. But again, really, what did you do with that? Did you motivate the group to do something fantastic? Did you manage them through challenges and come out ahead, or even, make some mistakes, but still really, inspire people to, enjoy the experience, to, grow individually, and then have the team achieve more success than they would have alone. Third, impressive individual achievements. So that's probably actually not leadership. It's great, if you built a complex model, it can showcase analytical skills, critical thinking. Those are important things, don't get me wrong, but they're not necessarily leadership. Leadership, would be something like identifying room for opportunity, for the company, and then, putting a model together that demonstrated it to, the leadership team and advocating for change. I mean, that's really leadership. It's not doing the analytical work or sort of taking orders and just fulfilling them. Perhaps you were asked to create this model and you did it and it was great. That's fantastic, but that's not leadership. Lastly, community involvement. A lot of people do think of, their extracurriculars as leadership, and they're fantastic. Again, as I mentioned, schools really want engaged community citizens. That is super important. Obviously great on a personal level, but, as a tutor, how did you impact the lives of those, with whom you worked? Did you perhaps, initiate change within the tutoring organization that made your processes and your impact on students greater? Did you found, tutoring agency? That's really the leadership that would be, the piece that could be showcased here, not just simply, showing up and doing the tutoring yourself. So, as I hope I've gotten across here, you don't have to have, a team under you or a fancy title, to be able to showcase leadership in your application. It really can be sort of day-to-day projects, that you've encountered in college, in work, in extracurriculars, and really just taking those to the next level and constantly showing initiative to make things better. And that really is the leadership element of it. So a little bit more on that, element. So the Harvard Business Review had a fantastic article a couple of years ago about inherently leadership. What they really looked at was what makes the most successful CEOs succeed? What are those common characteristics that make them great and help them lead their companies to success? So, they interviewed a bunch of different CEOs, and the common thread were fourfold here: decisiveness, inspiration, adaptability, and reliability. And I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but the article is quoted there at the bottom if you want to read it in its entirety. But the first quality, was decisiveness. So in a business setting, there's always ambiguity and not necessarily a clear path forward. What the most successful CEOs did was they drove groups to decisions. So they helped them make decisions, even when things were uncertain. And even if the path was wrong, frankly, they, drove the group forward and towards a decision. The second characteristic was inspiration. So people loved working for them. People loved working with them. They inspire others to do their best work. They educate them and allow them to share in achievements. So, they don't take the credit themselves. Really, they, show their success through the success of their team members. Third is adaptability. So, leaders really showed who they were when there were challenges ahead, or when there was, a change in strategy, something new that came down the pike that they had to react to quickly. So they were adaptable. They succeeded in situations where there was no playbook, and they grew from failures. So perhaps they did fail and, took a wrong turn, but they reflected on that failure and figured out how to, avoid it the next time. Lastly is reliability. So leaders repeatedly deliver, and they consistently follow through on their commitments. So this is really where history comes into play, and just showing a pattern of delivering results and being consistent. They set the bar high and focused on the greater good. So, I hope what this gets across, are the qualities that the most successful CEOs, exhibited, is not necessarily, things you're going to be able to point to today in terms of grand, accomplishments. You're not the CEO most likely of a big company right now, which is totally fine. But what business schools want to see is they want to see that you have leadership potential. So to show this, perhaps there are smaller scale situations in your life where you can point to, having one of these four characteristics. That will show the admissions committee that in the future, when faced with more, high stakes situations, that you'll come out as a great leader, and that their, curriculum will help further build those skills. So again, you don't need extraordinary situations to showcase leadership. And another side note, Harvard Business Review is a fantastic thing to be reading, at this point in your journey, just to, be educated on, business. And they have some fantastic articles. So wanted to point that out. Peruse it every once in a while. It can only help you. All right. So, I hope that we've sort of demystified, what exactly leadership is. It does not have to be, managing a team. It does not have to be, some extraordinary achievement. Now let's talk about how business schools assess, these leadership elements in your candidacy. So there are three main components of the application where you can showcase your leadership. The first is your resume, and this really is the place where you can demonstrate the consistency of your leadership behaviors. So you can demonstrate a history of consistently taking initiative, and that you leave things better than where you found them. So, thinking back to college, was there an extracurricular you were involved in and you had a meaningful impact? And then perhaps in your first job, even though you were junior, you identified an area for improvement, and you took the reins to drive that forward. And then in your current role, maybe you have something that's a little more strategic in thought, or higher level, but it's really that consistency through all parts of your resume, extracurriculars, work, undergrad, and consistently showing that is going to impress the admissions committee as it relates to your leadership. The second component of the application where you can showcase leadership is in your essays. So the essays are the place where you really detail your leadership approach. You can tell detailed stories of how you enabled others or helped a group overcome challenges. And the key here is to go into that detail of exactly what you did, and why, and how people reacted, how they were changed as a result of your efforts. And along the same vein, as essays are the interview. So in your business school interview, you'll likely be asked a number of behavioral questions. Tell me about a time where you led a team. Tell me about a time where you were working in a group and you faced a difficult situation. How did you respond? So, these questions are ripe for really highlighting how you are a leader and you exhibit these leadership qualities. So they're an opportunity to detail these stories. They're also, an opportunity to show clear, logical communication skills. So a leader is only so good as their communication is. Really, they have to describe their ideas. They have to be convincing. They have to use their influence. And so the interview is the best place to show that you can verbalize your thoughts logically and clearly to someone who wasn't there or perhaps doesn't have your specific technical background. So, that is really, how the interview can help you, to put those leadership skills out there into practice and showcase them for the admissions committee. So these are the three places where, really you're going to highlight your leadership in your application. The next, aside from kind of getting that straight in your head, the next thing is to come up with your leadership examples. So I'm going to outline a process for doing that. A lot of people, would hear the first part of this presentation and be intimidated, thinking, oh, I don't know, if I really, have any great stories. I know they don't have to be, spectacular or anything, but, what do I have? Sit down and really brainstorm. Go through all of, your educational experiences, your various jobs that you've had at this point, any extracurriculars you're involved in. I think you probably have more leadership examples than you think. Really sit down to brainstorm those. We'll go through a couple of thought starters in a moment that can help you with that process. Next is, if you feel like you are lacking a bit, that's fine. You were sitting here in February, you have some time, which is great, between now and application submission. So, what can you do? And we'll go into some, suggestions on that front. And third, act on those plans, obviously, get those examples under your belt, but then you have to communicate them clearly in your application. And that's where we'll jump back to these three elements of the application, and we'll talk, at a high level as to, how best to communicate the leadership elements. All right, so first, brainstorm what you already have. You might have more than you think. Think back to all of these settings. When did you proactively surface a problem? When did you challenge the status quo or, advocate for an unpopular idea? Advocated for an innovative solution. So maybe everybody, had always done it, done something a certain way, and you took a step back and said, hey, I think there's maybe a better way to do this. And you kind of convinced the team of that. Helped a team work through a challenge or setback. So, maybe you were, going down a certain path with a solution and then you realized it wasn't going to work. How did you help the team, react and redirect, and ultimately, find success or not? And what were the learnings from that? along the same veins as some of the others. When did you drive a group to a consensus or a solution? It can be a small scale thing, but I think the message can be the same. It can show the leadership potential that you'll demonstrate throughout your career. And lastly, when did you coach or mentor someone, when it was not required of you? Even if it wasn't a formal coaching or mentorship relationship, maybe it was just someone junior to you at your firm that you really took under your wing. Maybe they were struggling and you helped them, get up to speed, something like that. Just think more broadly. It doesn't have to be something formal or a title or, really an epic achievement. It's just, trying to figure out the impact you had on someone and doing something, when you weren't explicitly asked or it wasn't explicitly part of your job description. So what if you're sitting here and you're saying, oh, shoot, I don't think I have that many examples to highlight in my applications. What can I do between now and when I submit? There's a lot. Look at the ideas and the thought starters I had on the prior page and really, look for ways to do them in your current day-to-day job or extracurriculars. Identify problems, think about what could be done better and then advocate to do it that way. Secondly, perhaps you're a member on a team, in an employee resource group at work or, on a committee within an extracurricular. Can you take on a leadership role where you'll really be able to drive the strategic agenda within that group, even if, it's not a formal team leadership role, within your main job and you're not directly managing anyone? That's okay. There are other ways to sort of, more easily accessible ways to take on a leadership role. Third, maybe informally you can just, take an interest in someone and, mentor them and, help them succeed. Or even on a project, if, you see someone in a group that's, perhaps quieter but might have some great ideas and you're going to help draw out their ideas so they're heard. I mean, that is a great leadership example if, perhaps they then, are able to, help the group find a solution and you really, helped them to be a contributor. And then lastly, you do have some time, so maybe you can get involved in a new extracurricular activity. This is possible even if you work long hours or you're, a traveling consultant or something like that. So there are two great websites that I wanted to bring your attention to. One is Catch-A-Fire and one is the Taproot Foundation. So both of those pair professionals with nonprofits that are looking for help. Catch-A-Fire, is more discrete project-based, and perhaps there are things you can do in as little as an hour. One that I saw recently was, a nonprofit was looking for a finance professional or someone with an accounting background to help them allocate their indirect costs. So, something very simple, but if you have that expertise, you can help them. And then that's a result you can speak to. Taproot, really pairs people with nonprofits. And it might be a longer term strategic project, but definitely doable in the time between now and when your applications are due. Or, perhaps think back to your undergrad. Is there an alumni association you can get involved in that maybe opens up some mentorship opportunities for you to talk to current students? That's always a great direction to go as well. But I really like Catch-A-Fire and Taproot as, they're better ways to find quick measurable impacts that are more certain and you can really point to in your examples. So those are fantastic, but there are a lot of opportunities out there. So lastly, once you have some great examples to use, how do you communicate them? So first, as we mentioned, is your resume. So you want your bullets to really showcase accomplishments. People are often surprised when they sit down to do their business school applications that the resume needs to change a lot. So your resume for work perhaps is about the skills you have and what you kind of do day to day in your job. A business school resume is very different. It's focused on your accomplishments, and you can showcase your leadership in a way, that is highlighted by your accomplishments. So you want to, highlight the collaboration skills you used on a project. You want to demonstrate quantifiable results. So, I drafted a quick bullet that I thought would be a good example that, perhaps someone could leverage. So, for instance, an accomplishments focused bullet would be something like, I led due diligence efforts for an acquisition, engaging a cross-functional team to understand the business risks and driving consensus to move forward on my recommendation. And then the results would be, acquisition is delivering growth targets or something. So, led the efforts. Maybe you didn't lead the entire acquisition, but maybe you led a work stream. So you led the due diligence work stream. Point to that, and you had to engage a cross-functional team. You couldn't do the due diligence on your own. You had to get information from other parties. So, highlight that cross-functional element to it to really highlight how you brought together different people with different skill sets to, accomplish your objective. So that, that's one way to do it. And just really in your resume, think about accomplishments, specifically those that highlight the leadership qualities that we've talked about today. Second, in your essays and your interviews, so leverage the STAR format. You really want to, clearly set up the situation, that's the S, and, also, sort of the task at hand. So, clearly set the context, but where I often see people are light is in the A piece of this, so the actions. Highlight what you did as a leader, the actions you took to, respond to the situation and the task at hand. And then, go to the result. What did you deliver for, the organization? And so leveraging the STAR format, you want to showcase actions you took to engage others and crediting the team for success. So these are sort of subtle tweaks to the way your story is written, but that's how your leadership elements come across. You want to demonstrate self-awareness and the ability to learn from mistakes, as we talked about previously. And then beyond the essays, interviews, and the resume, there's some smaller elements where, leadership comes out, your recommendations. So we always recommend talking to your recommenders before they sit down to write. Coach them on how, leadership is one of the most important elements business schools are looking for. And that, if they can think of any ways that you've demonstrated leadership qualities to certainly highlight them. Perhaps, tee up a few ideas for them. You're certainly not writing anything for them. That's not at all what I'm recommending. I'm just saying, jog their memory a little bit and talk about projects you've worked on, and help coach them on how important that element is for your application. Networking events and campus tours and the like. So leaders in these situations will make sure that the whole group is heard. They'll make sure that, everybody has a chance to talk. I mean, there's a certain element of social savvy and, clear communication, ensuring everybody, gets the floor that a leader would demonstrate in those capacities. So I know that's sort of a brief overview of really how to communicate your leadership. It's such an individualized thing, but there are a number of places to do that, and the key is really to present a cohesive picture of who you are as a leader, and have the examples to support it. So that's all I have prepared. Here is my email address if anyone wants to get in touch. We do free 30-minute consults. You can check our website for really informative blog articles. They're obviously free, and we'd love to have you read them. Okay, I'm going to exit out of my presentation, and then I will take some questions. So I think my friends at GMAT Club are going to tee up some questions here. So I'll just wait for that, but just did want to remind you that if you're liking the session, please hit like or dislike if that's true as well. Email, please, Katie, Katie, at vantagepointmba.com. And I can also post that underneath in the commentary after the recording. Yep, thank you. There we go. This is a good question. One I get a lot is a 6-month gap between two jobs viewed negatively. Not necessarily. I think that the key for you will be leveraging the optional essay that all of the applications have. So in that, you can talk about, what the specific situation was. I mean, I think, the admissions committee is human. I'm sure they've had, unfortunate job situations in the past where, a gap might have been created. So really the important thing there would just be to explain it and talk about kind of what you did to grow as a person during that gap. What did you learn? How did you go about networking? Just briefly. I mean, it's really cut and dry. And I think as long as there's an explanation, I don't think that you need too much there. All right, well, it seems we might not have very many questions today, which is completely fine. Thank you again for joining me. I hope you found it helpful, and thank you again to GMAT Club. Oh, got one more question. How many recommendations are good to have? So most schools ask for 2 formal recommendations. So that's the number you should really have teed up. And I find that it's easier to have the same recommenders do all of the schools to which you're applying because they already have the material. They sort of have gotten used to it. Many of the questions are sort of the same. So I would tee up 2 recommenders going into kind of who to have. You want people that have worked with you closely, superior to you, but does not have to be the CEO of your organization or something like that. It can be just a supervisor. Just the key is that they know you well and they can speak to your accomplishments, in a detailed way. Oh, this is also a great question. How can we demonstrate leadership in a group interview? So not sure if people are walking into the Wharton team-based discussion here soon, but that is certainly a group interview. I know that Michigan Ross also does a small team-based component to their interview as well. So this is somewhat situational dependent. I think that's the most challenging part about these group interviews is that there's only so much you can prepare in advance, because you don't know what the group dynamic is going to be. I actually wrote a blog article on this exact topic recently. So if you go to the Vantage Point website, you can find that specifically related to the Wharton team-based discussion and the advice I'd give there. But it's a great place to demonstrate leadership. And it's not always by taking charge. Really, the key things are make sure that everyone is being heard, help the group drive towards a consensus. And that can be, asking very insightful questions about, an idea that's been launched, not to knock it down. In many cases, and most cases, if the group is trying to, solve a problem or something and you're being observed doing that, a lot of times your answer might not be the one that's chosen, and that's fine. You just want to, help the group drive towards, a solution, and it doesn't have to be the absolute best solution either. As long as it's a cohesive solution that you can communicate well and it's logical and well thought out. So I would, ask insightful questions that help the group drive towards a consensus, make sure everyone is being heard. Thank you for the post about the blog. Make sure everyone is being heard, help wrap up the group's thoughts, make sure that you're staying on time. These are all ways that you can demonstrate leadership in a group interview. So most top business school programs, the average age is, between 28 and 32. So, and that's, sort of coincides somewhat, maybe a little bit younger, with 4 to 7 years of work experience. That's the average. There are certainly outliers, but I would say, you would have to have a pretty compelling story if you are outside of that age range for a full-time kind of top business school. Also on our blog, we do have a list of the different programs, sort of the average age and average work experience. Some skew slightly older, like maybe the average work experience is 5.5 years as opposed to 4. Harvard, Stanford tend to be on the younger side these days. Programs like UT, Tepper, some of those tend to be slightly older, but still the average is, below 6 years of work experience. It's not impossible, but again, you really do have to have some extraordinary circumstances to highlight and a very strong why behind, pursuing the MBA at this stage of your career. Why is it that an MBA is the way that you're going to progress to, what your long-term goals are? Why is that the only way? Why have you gotten to this point and made the decision? So the rationale and really developing those ideas in your essays is going to be critical. Once you get to about 10 years of work experience, the EMBAs are typically the best option. Those aren't easy for career switchers. The format can be challenging for people because it requires a fair amount of travel. But once you do get past that, I think that the evening programs and the EMBAs tend to be a better hit rate of acceptance. Is there a particular type of leadership style AdComs prefer? This is a great question. I would say no, because they are looking for a diversity of experience. So I would say all of those types are great. Thought leadership, strategic leadership, people, team leadership. Ideally, a candidate, the ideal candidate, let's say, would have some elements of all of those qualities. So it would be great if you could sort of highlight examples for each of them, but say you're heavier on one than the other. I mean, I think that's completely fine. You sort of, want to have a defined personal brand of kind of what your key contributions will be on campus. So maybe one of those is the place where you're stronger. Would try to, again, diversify and pull out examples of the other sort of buckets there. But AdComs are looking to build a diverse class, and a lot of times that means, pulling people with certain skill sets that, they're pretty deep on, and then, maybe light on others. So, I think being deep on one of those types of leadership could actually, work well within a class. Do we need to wait a while before taking charge in a group? So, not sure if this relates to in a setting in terms of trying to acquire a leadership role, or if you're talking more about like in a group interview setting. I'll maybe assume the latter. I think it's always good to be a listener. I think leaders, listen very intently and then figure out where they can contribute most effectively. So in a group setting, you don't necessarily want to be the person that talks the most. I think that's a common misperception. But you want to be the person whose questions and thoughts that you contribute are very insightful and well communicated. So if it were me, I would sort of sit back and think about where you really want to jump in, as opposed to jumping in with many thoughts that maybe aren't the most deeply vetted or insightful. There's some specific leadership that can be helpful for finance or technology field. I think leadership is more of a general concept. I don't think that it's, I don't think that going into a specific field makes the type of leadership more important. But I would say that, as those two fields, finance and technology, are somewhat technical, it's somewhat assumed that you have those, technical skills, maybe the analytics. So showcasing the people side of things of your leadership, taking cross-functional perspectives, being able to communicate cross-functionally in an understandable way, having a bigger strategic mindset than just your functional silo. I think being able to showcase that you're able to do those things is key, for someone coming from finance or technology, that you're able to sort of think beyond your particular area of expertise. Okay. Do all of the recommendations have to come from your workplace? No, absolutely not. I would say perhaps one should. Schools often ask that your current supervisor be one of your recommenders, and if they are not, then to explain why in the optional essay, which is fine. And I think it's an easy explanation if you don't want to share your goals with them or whatnot. But that indicates to me that they do want to see at least some commentary on a workplace setting. So I would say at least one of your recommenders should. But if you want to have a recommendation, perhaps from an extracurricular in which you're involved, I think that could be a great addition to, show a holistic perspective on who you are as a candidate. Are leadership-related points cross-verified via recommendations? You always want your recommendations to back up and support what you've said in your essays. Maybe not exactly like don't have to tell the exact same stories, but you want the picture that they paint of you to be cohesive with who you've presented yourself to be. I don't think that, they would go to your recommenders and ask, did this actually happen? There certainly are background checks, for business schools and such, but, I don't think they're necessarily cross-verified, but you wouldn't want them to contradict, certainly. And the best recommendations just further emphasize the points you've made about yourself elsewhere in the application. For a candidate with 10 plus years work experience in vastly different fields, what would you recommend? So I'm not exactly sure I'm getting the question here. I don't know if you can type in with a little bit more clarification. I mean, in the absence of more information, I would just say, paint a cohesive picture of who you are as a leader, even if it's in different fields. So, perhaps you're great at shepherding change through an organization, even if in different industries. Maybe you're great at, inspiring others. I mean, just look for ways to showcase who you are not specific to the industry, and sort of show that your personal elements have, sort of remained consistent throughout your career. All right, maybe one more question. Deferred enrollment programs, yep. So yeah, it's hard, right? Because you're not in the workplace yet. Deferred enrollment programs are awesome, and there's certainly a lot of them being launched these days from really solid schools. So congrats on that. And it is hard. Hopefully, in college or in your master's program right now, you're involved in some extracurriculars, or you can point to some examples that are school related that might be able to showcase your leadership. If not, I would try to, get involved pretty heavily on campus, because I think that's what the peer set will be doing. So, I would heavily lean on extracurriculars as it relates to leadership. If you want more specifics about, positioning yourself for deferred enrollment in terms of kind of like, what GMAT score do I need? Where should my GPA be? What else should I showcase? How should I talk about career goals? Feel free to email me offline. Just want to, keep this focused on leadership. But again, I would just really lean heavily on, classwork, classroom-based teams, extracurriculars, hopefully, having some leadership roles there that would, develop some stories that you can talk to in your applications. All right. Last one. All right. Well, this is last one. Okay. I think leaders should have good analytical skills so that to correctly make decisions. So I'm not saying that they shouldn't have great analytical skills. I think that they absolutely should. But just having, leadership is not an individual accomplishment, right? You need others. So I'm just saying that, just having analytical skills is not leadership. I'm not saying it's not important. Business schools, if you're thinking about kind of the key criteria that they look for in applicants, analytical skills is certainly one. Teamwork and collaboration is certainly one. And I would say leadership is another, critical thinking. So there's sort of a handful of things that business schools look for. Analytical skills, absolutely high in the priority. You showcase that through your GMAT score, through your GRE, and there's a lot of places where you can point to that. What I'm saying is that, leadership is one that is also just as important, and then giving some advice as to how to showcase that in your application. So I hope that clarifies things a little bit more. All right, fantastic. Thank you again, everyone, for your questions and for listening today. Replay is obviously available, and sign up again for subscribe to the channel so you can get more sessions like this. All right, thanks very much.